Senator Mezek, Children's Minister. After yesterday's events, how can, the bailiff speech, controversial speech, how can the bailiff and the supporters of that office now keep trotting out the line that he or the role isn't political? How can they defend that?
They can't. It's as pure and simple as that. The bailiff's speech yesterday morning was a political statement. It was a direct attempt to influence members of the Assembly and to essentially disparage the government agenda, which is that we accept the care inquiry's findings and recommendations, and he sat in a position where we couldn't challenge him and denigrated that report. I just had a few quiet conversations with states members in the tea room, and even those who support the dual role of the bailiff, some of them are now thinking, actually, that was clearly political and inappropriate.
So it pretty much had the opposite effect then, is that what sort of
he's completely shot himself in the foot. The office of bailiff, its advocates will say, you don't need to worry about it because it is apolitical and the individuals who hold that office are scrupulously independent. Yesterday proved that is simply not the case. Yeah,
it can't be defended anymore. So you very promptly published a statement yesterday after the speech, basically to, if you like, the way I say it, undo the damage caused by the speech. But you had little choice as Children's Minister. As you've just said, the government is committed to implementing the inquiry's recommendations. And the bailiff, I think you just said it there, is pretty much saying, well, don't implement them. So you by you putting that speech, your statement out, they wouldn't let you. Tell me about that. They wouldn't let you present the statement.
So, as Minister for Children, it is part of my role to oversee the actions the government takes to implement the care inquiry's recommendations. So it is my responsibility to speak in the Assembly and update elected members of the Assembly on how that work is going, and let them have the opportunity to challenge me if we're not doing things properly or we're not doing things quickly enough. So when the bailiff spoke out and denigrated this report, which by extension means he was denigrating the government programme, because that is what we're committed to do, to seeing out these recommendations, I thought it was right not to let what he said go unchallenged, and as the minister responsible, I think I ought to have been given the opportunity to give an official statement and then to take questions from states members afterwards, in which case they could be as challenging as they felt was appropriate there. So I, along with my officers, put a statement together, submitted it to the bailiff and gave our explanation as to why it ought to be allowed and why it was within the rules of the Assembly. Bearing in mind I'm submitting my statement to the very person whose actions I'm being critical of in my statement. So what does he say? He says, no, can't do it.
It's just an absolute nonsense for anybody looking from the outside of Jersey to see how this is. But I suppose you had to, in a way, get this statement out there to assure survivors, abusees of abuse and their supporters that, look, the bailiff isn't talking for us. I mean, you had little option other than to do something, did you?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I felt I couldn't let what he'd said go unchallenged, because what he said was wrong. He impugns the integrity of the members of the care inquiry panel with no justification other than they came to conclusions that were inconvenient for him, bearing in mind his position is conflicted.
Wholly conflicted.
That they made a recommendation that was critical, not of him as an individual, but of the role and its place in society, and how the lack of separation of powers gives rise to very legitimate and understandable feelings that our institutions don't work for the people that they're meant to work for because of these conflicts and these overlaps. And so I felt as minister I ought to be able to challenge that and ought to be able to put the alternative point of view and to hopefully try to reiterate to those people who quite understandably have very little faith in our institutions in Jersey, to say, some of us get this, and some of us are fighting for you and trying to get this change through. Please don't just accept the word of the bailiff as being speaking on behalf of everyone, because he's absolutely not.
Well, because again, you weren't allowed to bring that statement in. Nobody was allowed to question him. The media haven't questioned him, haven't brought him in for an interview or doorstepped him. Mm-hmm. So I suppose just exactly who the is the bailiff answerable to?
Well, if it weren't for the fact it was his last day as President of the States yesterday, I wouldn't be here doing an interview with you, because I'd be busy putting a vote of no confidence together against him. That's how serious I think his behaviour was yesterday. But I can't do that because he's about to retire.
He boxed bloody clever there, didn't he? Because he used the communications from the presiding officer sort of idea. So therefore, nobody could question him. No, he was just totally unaccountable for it. It's quite a shrewd move on his behalf, wasn't it?
It was, and so I stood up the moment he'd finished his statement. I stood up to say, well, after a political statement, it's normal that you take 15 minutes of questions. And he, of course, said, well, no, that's against the rules. That can't happen. And then when I submitted my statement to him to approve, one of the grounds he used for refusing it is that States members aren't allowed to comment on, either in a way of support or opposition to whatever the bailiff says in his opening communications. We're not allowed to comment on it. The way I see it, the opening communications section is meant to be for a bailiff to welcome guests, or to say, oh, we have visiting dignitaries in the viewing gallery, please stomp your feet to welcome them. That's what that part of the agenda is meant for, not meant for a political statement. So he used a mechanism to stop the elected members from being able to challenge him, and that's totally wrong.
Yeah, so again, here's from my perspective, things have got pretty much, they've been winding down in regards to the care inquiry and the child abuse and everything from 2008, Operation Rectangle. Everything had been pretty much slowing down on the internet, online, the blogs, media. So I ask, what or who on earth advised William Bailhache to kick it all off again? Because I say everything was going quiet. Now everything's come right to the fore again, so much so that I'm due to be interviewing the former senior investigating officer, Lenny Harper, later today. So this has all just exploded again. So who the hell advises the William Bailhache or the bailiff to make these statements and bring it all up again?
I've got no idea. I suspect he probably makes these decisions unilaterally, but whoever he speaks to before making these decisions, he's shot himself in the foot here. He's clearly done away with the greatest argument that those of us who support the separation of powers always face, which is that, well, the bailiffs do act impartially, they do act independently, they don't act upon any conflicts, even if there's a perception of one. And he's just shown that that's not the case, and that they are political, that they do make interjections into the political realm that are inappropriate.
But it just doesn't make any sense, does it, to bring all this? And again, as part of your argument, what you're saying there, because Deputy Mike Higgins, I think, was one of the first to stand up yesterday, and he said, hang on a minute, you don't allow loads of my questions coming through if they involve the judiciary or the Crown officers and everything. So, and of course, it's the bailiff who...
He's refused some of my questions previously as well.
So, I mean, rightly or wrongly, he could be accused of political bias there, by not allowing...
Yeah, he is, and the way I phrased it in the statement that I attempted to give was that the role of the presiding officer is meant to be to facilitate States members in doing their job, whatever that job happens to be. If they're a member of the government, it's meant to be to facilitate the government tabling their business for debate. And if they're not part of the government or want to oppose what the government's doing, his job is to facilitate them challenging and holding the government to account. It is not his job to take part in that challenge and take a partisan role in it, because he himself can't be held to account. So it's completely undemocratic and overly political in a way that would not be accepted anywhere else in the world.
Well, hopefully it won't be accepted here for much longer. So
it's worth saying I've actually spoken to some colleagues from Guernsey who are astounded. So they've got the same lack of separation of powers as we do, but they say that this would never happen in Guernsey. So when people dismiss what the Care Inquiry said about the Jersey way, I say, oh, well, this happens all around the world. They're wrong. There is a unique Jersey thing about this that comes from hundreds of years of our culture and political history.
It's the Jersey way, isn't it? Mm-hmm. So, but as part of my evidence to the Care Inquiry back in 2016, I think I gave my evidence to the. I said words to the effect that, like, ironically, those like the Bailiff, for instance, who claim to have Jersey's reputation at their forefront of their thing, are the very people destroying it, and they just don't get it. They can't see it. I mean, what William Bailhache did yesterday, to me, destroyed Jersey's reputation again, and he claims to be looking after Jersey's reputation. So that falls into what you're saying there. He just shot himself in the foot and done Jersey a disservice, didn't he?
Yeah, and he's fulfilled exactly what the Care Inquiry panel said in their second report, which is that this looks terrible internationally, and that it sends the wrong message, and that when you oppose democratic change, you just send out all the wrong messages about your society, and we don't need that right now because we're trying to deal with decades of failure in safeguarding children. To have this thrown into the mix as well makes the island look terrible, and this is exactly what the Care Inquiry predicted in their second report. Just got
the, it beggars belief, it really does. So here's a theory from me, and I want you to bear with me for a minute. Mm-hmm. Now, this speech, as far as I see, could be seen as a vendetta carried out by William Bailhache for his brother Philip. For all intents and purposes, had his honesty called into question by the panel and its report. Philip Bailhache did, And now, here's what William Bailhache said yesterday, okay? Now, I hope the viewers will listen to this carefully. I'll put it up on the blog anyway. William Bailhache said yesterday, I cannot accept that a lawyer of the chairman's... He's talking about Francis Oldham QC. I cannot accept that a lawyer of the chairman's experience would inadvertently have drafted such an unfortunate juxtaposition of words. I'm sure that the way in which Jersey receives her panel's report matters greatly to her, Francis Oldham QC. Her linkage of allegations of lack of fairness and transparency in decision-making by the bailiff to historic child abuse was a grave error. Now, Francis Oldham QC, in her report in 2017, wrote this: we cannot accept that a politician and lawyer of his experience, Philip Bailhache, would inadvertently have made what he told the inquiry was an unfortunate juxtaposition of words. We are sure that the way in which Jersey is perceived internationally matters greatly to him. His linking of Jersey's reputation to the child abuse investigation was, we are satisfied, a grave political error. That's almost word for word. William Bailhache is, I don't know if he's mocking, mimicking, he's certainly mirroring and doesn't that look like a personal vendetta and spite from William Bailhache against the chairman of the panel, Francis Oldham QC?
That's really well spotted. I hadn't noticed that yesterday, that he was copying almost word for word what Francis Oldham had said. I did notice yesterday he used the word prejudice to describe the position the panel were coming from to make their recommendations. He's clearly impugning their integrity, and to phrase it in such a way, to copy how they had phrased it, is just brazen. I hope people pick up on that now you've pointed it out. That's just unbelievable that he's chosen to do that.
And again, how does it make him and Jersey and his office look? Because it's difficult to come to any other conclusion other than he's trying to, I don't know the word I'm looking for, he's getting his brother's word across there saying, look, basically you did this to my brother Philip, so I'm doing it to you, and I'm going to use your own words to do it. It looks, how does it make Jersey look? How does it make, because people aren't political animals like yourself and myself and others, and people are going to tar you as a politician with the same brush as William Bailhache, and here he is looking like settling a vendetta. It's sick, isn't it?
It's taunting us, which is just unbelievable that he choose to behave in that way. The only good thing, though, when both of these quotes are put to us, is that we can recognise that Frances Oldham has a point when she says it, and William Bailhache does not have a point when he says it. It's, I think, vendetta is probably a fair word. He will probably realise that the days of the bailiffs of Jersey are coming to an end. Our lack of separation of powers is not sustainable, and after hundreds of years of history of bailiffs of Jersey essentially ruling as dictators of Jersey, that situation is not sustainable. It will come to an end at some point, and he inadvertently is bringing those days sooner, so at least we've got that to be grateful for him for.
Well, do you think so? Because, like, again, yesterday it was sickening. It was just sickening listening to the foot stamping of approval of the bailiff's speech in the chamber. You know, there seems to be support for him or his chain of thought. You know, so is Tim Lecoq, our next bailiff, our deputy bailiff now, is he going to be anything different? You know, and how long do we have to suffer this continued assault on democracy? Mm-hmm. You know, I think there was a fair bit of support for the bailiff yesterday with the foot stomping, mainly led by the constables.
Yes, that's right.
So if it goes to the vote in the States to get rid of the bailiff out of the States, you know, has he really got as little support as you might suggest?
There has never been a straightforward vote in the Assembly on whether we keep the bailiff as presiding officer, because every time the proposition has been brought forward, it's been subjected to a wrecking amendment to put it to referendum. And if the question is, should we have a referendum on the dual role of the bailiff? Well, I'll vote no to that, because I don't think it should be put to referendum, even though I support ending the dual role of bailiff, because I think that's the wrong way to do it. So a straightforward vote on a non-wrecked proposition has never happened in the Assembly, so we don't know what the result would be. I can only hope that as time goes on, the arguments become weaker and weaker against this change. William Bailhache has helped that cause yesterday by acting in such an overtly political way, and you know, I will try and not be too personal about Tim Lecoq, but he has presided over the Assembly as deputy bailiff. I'm sorry to say that I don't think he does a particularly good job of it. He's not as brazen as William Bailhache has been with political statements or anything like that, but he comes across as a bit out of his depth, and States members are often able to run rings around him, which actually is not what you want in a presiding officer. You do want a strong presiding officer, but one whose strength comes from their adherence to the principles of impartiality and facilitating debate in that way. So I think as time goes by, we'll get a greater appetite for somebody who's more capable of doing the job.
And hopefully be an elected member and not somebody who's forced upon us. So
yeah.
I suppose we've got to wrap up now. Been on a while now. Obviously, you as Children's Minister, after the speech yesterday, I know you've made a statement. I'll see if we can get it up on the blog as well. But is there anything you want to say to reassure victims, survivors, abusees, that Jersey is getting safer? Because you've got it all to do now. This has made your life a lot more difficult, the bailiff's speech yesterday. So is there anything you can say to those going through the system now that could reassure them?
The first point is that the bailiff does not speak on behalf of the government of Jersey. I'm sincerely sorry that he chose to behave the way he did, and I hope that it's not caused too much hurt amongst those who rely on our institutions to keep them safe and to get them justice when they deserve it. What I can say is the Care Inquiry second report recognised that progress is being made in Jersey. Our government plan that's debated at the end of November will be putting millions of pounds of investment into our children's services, which is important. The money's not everything, but the money will help us improve services where we need to. We've also got Ofsted, who recently did an independent inspection of our children's services. They're reporting probably in the next month to analyse where
the
we
report
are.
will be public.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that'll be public, and we're also working on establishing how we have regular independent inspections and make them compulsory, so that we can keep being held to account on it. And these independent inspections will provide a challenge and way of holding us to account in a way that never happened for decades in the island, and that can only make children safer.
Time will tell. We'll be keeping an eye on it. For the time, thanks for the interview, Senator.
Thank you.